Welcome to the Deep Dive, your shortcut to understanding the complex topics shaping our world. Today, we're diving deep into psychology.
That thrilling world, yeah.
Exactly. The science that tries to figure out our thoughts, our feelings, our actions, basically human behavior.
It's a huge field.
It really is.
Yeah.
And our mission today is to, cut straight to the core. We're not just listing definitions.
Oh, we need the context.
Right. We're tracing psychology's journey from philosophy right up to, a proper science. We'll grab the key concepts, look at the main ways psychologists view things.
6 major perspectives, yeah.
And see how it all applies to your life.
Yeah.
Moving from the basics to some pretty surprising real-world stuff.
And that depth is really necessary because you hear psychology thrown around a lot, right, in popular culture?
Sure, definitely. Vaguely.
Exactly. So at its core, psychology is the scientific study of the mind and behavior.
Scientific being the key word there.
Absolutely. It's this huge umbrella, multidisciplinary, covering everything from, tiny neurochemical reactions.
All the way up to global social interactions.
Precisely. How we form memories, what drives us, why we get certain phobias. That's all psychology.
Okay, but before we jump into the how and why, we need clear boundaries because people mix it up with other fields all the time.
That's a really common point of confusion.
Let's start with psychology versus sociology. What's the difference there?
That's a crucial distinction. Sociology looks at the big picture social structures, groups.
The macro level.
Right. Institutional behavior, cultural trends, how societies shift. Psychology, though, zooms right in on the individual.
The individual mind, their behavior within that structure.
Exactly. So if you take something like a riot, a sociologist might study the group dynamics, the economic factors, maybe the police response.
Okay.
A psychologist, they're looking at the individuals involved. What were their motivations? Why did their emotional regulation maybe fail? What drove their decision-making in that moment?
Got it. Individual versus group focus. Now, what about psychology and psychiatry? Because people use those interchangeably, especially with mental health.
That's probably the biggest mix-up. And the difference is fundamental really comes down to training.
Right.
Psychiatry is a medical field. Psychiatrists or MDs, medical doctors, their main focus is diagnosing and treating often severe mental disorders.
And they primarily use medication, right?
Often, yes. Pharmaceutical interventions are a major tool. Their training starts with general medicine, then they specialize in mental health.
So how does psychology differ then?
Psychology is the scientific discipline studying the mind and behavior using research methods. Think experiments, observation. A clinical psychologist, for instance, uses therapy.
Like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy.
Exactly. But their foundation is in the research, understanding the mechanisms of the mind. A psychiatrist is more focused on the diagnosis and medical treatment of the disorder itself.
So they work together?
Ideally, yes, they're partners. But they come from 2 very different scientific traditions. One's rooted in medicine, the other in the science of mind and behavior.
Okay, that makes sense. So psychology is like the scientific bedrock, figuring out the how and why through research.
And the medical fields, like psychiatry, often build treatment strategies on that bedrock.
Right.
Precisely. And its scope is just immense. Honestly, whenever you talk about the human experience, psychology is in there somewhere.
From the tiny stuff to the big picture.
Yeah, from cognitive processes, how we take in sensory info, neurobiology, all the way up to social interactions, how personality develops, how we manage emotions.
And understanding those building blocks is key.
It's the key to actually using psychology, whether you want to be a better leader, a better partner, or just figure out why you keep putting things off.
Okay, let's unpack this history then. You said it didn't just pop up in a lab.
Not at all. For thousands of years, really, the big questions about the mind, they belong to philosophy.
Right, thinkers asking these huge questions that kind of paved the way.
Absolutely. Philosophical inquiry really set the stage, defining what we even thought was possible to know about the mind. We have to start with a couple of key Enlightenment figures. First up, René Descartes.
Ah, Descartes. I think, therefore I am, doubted everything.
That's him. But his big contribution to psychology, the game changer, was mind-body dualism.
Mind-body dualism, explain that.
It was this radical idea for the time. He suggested the mind, the non-physical thinking stuff, and the physical extended stuff are fundamentally separate things.
Separate entities.
Yeah, following different rules, operating independently, but somehow interacting.
Okay, that idea alone, separating mind from body, must have been huge.
Yeah.
It lets you think about the mind as something distinct, something you could potentially study on its own.
Exactly. It carved out a space for mental philosophy separate from just studying physical matter.
But wait, if they're separate, how do they interact? That sounds like a puzzle?
It is the puzzle. That's the famous interaction problem in philosophy, the big challenge for dualism. Descartes himself thought it happened in the pineal gland.
The pineal gland. Seriously?
Yeah, he called it the seat of the soul. Of course, modern neuroscience completely rejects that kind of rigid dualism.
Right, we mostly think mind and brain are interconnected now.
Overwhelmingly, yes. The view now is more like monism, mind and body are two aspects of the same thing. Maybe the mind emerges from brain activity. But the question Descartes asked about the mind's nature was absolutely essential to get psychology started.
Okay, so Descartes separates mind and body. What about John Locke? He sounds like he had a totally different take.
Totally different. Locke brought us tabula rasa.
The blank slate.
Exactly. This was radical empiricism. Locke basically argued quite forcefully against any kind of innate knowledge, no preloaded ideas.
So we're born completely empty.
According to Locke, yes. All our consciousness, our understanding, our thoughts, it's all shaped purely by experience, by our senses taking in the world.
The environment writes the story on that blank slate.
Precisely.
Wow. That idea that we're just products of experience must have been a massive influence later on, especially for behaviorism, right? All that focus on learning and conditioning.
It was the philosophical groundwork. If the mind starts blank, then studying the mind must mean studying how experience shapes it. It sets the stage perfectly for the next big leap.
And here's where it gets really exciting. The 19th century. Psychology decides to, leave the armchair and head for the lab.
That's a great way to put it. This is the official birth of psychology as a distinct science.
And there's a specific moment, isn't there?
There is. Leipzig, Germany, 1879. Wilhelm Wundt establishes the world's very first dedicated experimental psychology laboratory.
The first psych lab.
Right.
What was Wundt trying to do there? What was his goal?
Wundt's approach was called structuralism, and his goal was incredibly ambitious. He wanted to identify the basic elements, the building blocks of thoughts and feelings.
Like a chemist breaking down a compound.
Exactly like that. He wanted to find the structure of conscious experience by breaking it down into its simplest parts: sensations, feelings, images.
How on earth did he try to measure that?
His main method was introspection. He trained people, his subjects, to carefully look inward and report exactly what they were experiencing consciously when given a stimulus.
So, show them an apple and they don't just say apple.
Right. They'd report the sensation of greenness, the perception of roundness, maybe any memories or feelings it triggered. Very detailed, very specific reporting.
That sounds incredibly subjective and maybe a bit tedious.
It was both. And that was its downfall, really.
How could a science be built on something so personal?
That's the problem. While Wundt tried to make it rigorous, introspection was unreliable. Reports varied wildly from person to person, and it couldn't study anything happening outside of conscious awareness, which we now know is a huge part of mental life.
So it seemed too abstract, too disconnected from how the mind actually works in the real world.
Pretty much. It was seen as too academic, maybe missing the point, which led very quickly to a reaction.
Functionalism.
Yeah.
The American response.
Yes, largely driven by the brilliant William James. Functionalism flipped the script entirely.
Instead of, what is the mind made of?
James asked, what is the mind for? What's its function? He was heavily influenced by Darwin and evolution.
So how does the mind help us survive and adapt?
Precisely. Functionalism looked at how psychological processes, thinking, feeling, learning, serve a purpose. Why do we remember things? Why do we feel fear? The answers were always tied to adaptation and survival.
It sounds much more practical.
It focused on consciousness, emotions, willpower, but all in the context of real-world behavior. Functionalism really opened the door for applied psychology, using psychology to solve practical problems.
So structuralism breaks down, functionalism looks at the purpose, and these set the stage for what came next.
Well, the stage was set, and then the early 20th century brought these other huge schools of thought. Behaviorism, think Watson and Skinner, focusing only on observable behavior.
Right, the black box approach.
Exactly. And then psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud, digging into the unconscious mind. These different, often clashing perspectives paved the way for the 6 major approaches we use today, the lenses psychologists use.
Right. If you really want to get how a psychologist thinks, how they approach a problem, or design a study, You need to know which lens they're looking through.
Absolutely.
And you said there are about 6 major ones.
Yeah,
Each giving a different angle on why we do what we do.
that's right. Understanding the lens tells you immediately what kinds of questions they're asking, what they count as evidence. They're like tools in a toolkit. You often use more than one, but they definitely started out in opposition to each other.
Okay, let's break them down. Let's start with the one that really dominated American psychology for a long time, the behavioral perspective.
Behaviorism. Pavlov, Watson, Skinner. Their focus was crystal clear, almost radically simple. Only study what you can directly observe. Observable behaviors.
So no speculating about thoughts or feelings.
Nope. They famously rejected studying internal mental states, thinking, feeling, wanting, because, they argued, you couldn't measure those objectively. You couldn't verify them scientifically.
So for strict behaviorists, everything we do is just learned, a response to the environment.
Pretty much. Behavior is shaped, molded entirely by the environment through conditioning. You've got the 2 main types. First, classical conditioning.
Pavlov's dogs, the bell and the drooling.
That's the classic example, yeah. A neutral stimulus, like the bell, gets associated with an automatic, involuntary response, like salivating for food.
Okay, and the other type?
Operant conditioning. That's more Skinner. This explains how we learn voluntary behaviors based on their consequences. Reinforcement makes a behavior more likely, punishment makes it less likely.
That sounds incredibly useful for things like therapy or training.
It was, and it still is. Behaviorism gave us really effective, measurable ways to change behavior. Think about systematic desensitization for phobias that comes straight out of this playbook.
And it's still around in things like CBT.
Its legacy is huge, especially in cognitive behavioral therapy, which combines those behavioral techniques with changing thought patterns. But pure behaviorism had its limits.
Like what?
It really struggled to explain complex human stuff. Language acquisition is the big one.
How kids learn to talk.
Yeah, critics like Noam Chomsky pointed out that kids say things they've never heard reinforced. They create novel sentences. Language seems too creative, too complex to be just learned responses. The human mind isn't just an empty box reacting to rewards.
Okay, so if behaviorism focused only on the outside, the next perspective dove deep inside, to the hidden stuff.
Exactly. The psychoanalytic or psychodynamic perspective, dominated, of course, by Sigmund Freud.
Right. Freud's all about the unconscious mind, isn't he?
Completely. This lens focuses squarely on the unconscious, on internal conflicts we're not even aware of, and crucially on the impact of early childhood experiences.
And he had that model of the mind, the I, ego.
Superego, yeah. The id is our primal drives, basic instincts. The superego is our internalized moral compass, society's rules. And the ego is the mediator, the rational self, trying to balance the two in the real world.
So our behavior is basically the result of this hidden battle.
According to Freud, yes. Unconscious desires, often related to sex and aggression in his view, drive everything, from dreams to those little slips of the tongue.
Freudian slips.
The very same.
Yeah.
And therapy, for Freudians, is about bringing those unconscious conflicts into the light, resolving them through techniques like free association.
Now, Freud's theories get a lot of criticism today, right? Hard to prove scientifically.
Huge criticisms, yes. Especially the difficulty of testing his ideas empirically. How do you prove the existence of the I? But his impact is undeniable.
How so?
Culturally, massive. He changed how we talk about the mind. And therapeutically, he normalized seeking help for mental issues, gave us concepts like defense mechanisms, denial, repression that are still useful. Plus, his focus on early relationships was a precursor to modern attachment theory, which is huge today for understanding relationships. But yeah, the criticism about being unfalsifiable, relying on interpretation after the fact, that's fair.
All right, moving on. We have the humanistic perspective next, sometimes called the third force.
Yes, the third force. Figures like Carl Rogers, Abraham Maslow. It really emerged as a reaction against the perceived negativity or determinism of both Freud and the behaviorists.
So what's the focus here? If it's not unconscious drives or environmental rewards.
Humanism is fundamentally optimistic. It champions individual potential, personal growth, and this innate human drive we all supposedly have towards self-actualization. Finding meaning, reaching your full potential.
It highlights the good stuff, creativity, free will.
Exactly. It rejects Freud's view of us being driven by dark urges and Skinner's view of us being puppets of the environment. It emphasizes our capacity for choice and growth.
And Maslow's hierarchy of needs fits in here, that pyramid diagram.
Perfectly. Maslow's hierarchy is a model of motivation. It says we have different levels of needs, and we're driven to meet them in a certain order.
Like, you need food and safety before you can worry about self-esteem.
Precisely. You can't focus on higher level needs, belonging, esteem, creativity, self-actualization at the top, until the basic foundational needs like physiological survival and safety are secure.
What does that tell us about motivation?
It gives us a framework. It suggests true psychological health comes when people are in environments that allow them to move up that hierarchy, to realize their potential. Rogers, for instance, talked about unconditional positive regard in therapy, accepting the client fully to help them grow.
And this led to positive psychology.
Directly. The modern positive psychology movement, focusing on well-being, strengths, and happiness, has its roots right here in humanism.
Okay, interesting. Now let's swing back inward again, the cognitive perspective. This feels really central today.
It is. The cognitive revolution back in the 50s and 60s was basically psychology saying, okay, we can't ignore what's happening inside the head anymore. We need to study the mind itself.
The black box wasn't cutting it.
Not for explaining complex behavior. So cognitive psychology dives deep into internal mental states, how we think, how we remember, how we use language, how we solve problems.
And the main model is the brain is a computer.
That was the dominant metaphor, yeah. Treating the brain like a complex information processor. Input, processing, output.
Like software running on hardware.
Kind of. Key figures like Ulrich Neisser studied how we encode information, store it, retrieve it. If you study memory from this perspective, you're looking at those specific processes. Why do we forget? How does attention affect learning?
This seems super relevant now with AI and everything.
Hugely relevant. That computer metaphor was powerful. It allowed researchers to study mental processes systematically, breaking things down into stages. It's vital for designing technology, user interfaces.
UX design?
Exactly. But that metaphor is also its limitation now.
How so?
Well, human thinking is way messier, more emotional, more creative than any current computer algorithm. So now researchers are looking beyond that simple input-output model towards ideas like embodied cognition, how our bodies affect thought, or dynamic systems.
Got it. Next up, the biological perspective. Grounding everything in the physical stuff.
Right. This lens zooms in on the hardware itself. Brain structures, neurons, neurotransmitters, genetics, hormones, the whole neurobiological setup.
The goal is to find the physical causes of behavior.
Essentially, yes. To understand the physical and chemical mechanisms behind behavior and mental processes. If someone has anxiety, the biological perspective asks, is a brain area like the amygdala overactive? Is there an imbalance in neurotransmitters like serotonin or GABA?
So studying things like dopamine for addiction.
Exactly. Understanding reward pathways, or using genetics to explore heritability, how much of a trait like intelligence or risk for a mental illness might be linked to our DNA.
But we aren't just our genes, right? How does this perspective account for, well, life experience?
That's the crucial modern update. We're way past simple genetic determinism. The field of epigenetics is huge now.
Epigenetics.
Yeah, it explores how environmental factors, things like stress, nutrition, trauma, it can actually change how our genes are expressed. They can switch genes on or off without altering the underlying DNA sequence.
Wow, so it's not nature versus nurture, it's nature and nurture interacting.
It's a constant dynamic interaction. The biological perspective today looks at how our hardwired biology is continuously shaped and molded by our environment throughout our lives.
Okay, one more perspective. We don't live in a vacuum. The sociocultural perspective.
Absolutely essential. This lens highlights how our society and our culture, the norms, the values, the social interactions around us profoundly shape our behavior and how we think.
Because what's considered normal varies hugely.
Massively. What's seen as typical behavior or even what counts as a psychological disorder can differ dramatically depending on the cultural context.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about Geert Hofstede's work comparing cultures on dimensions like individualism versus collectivism.
Okay.
In a highly individualistic culture, like the U.S. generally is, personal achievement and self-esteem are really emphasized. In a more collectivist culture, like many East Asian nations, group harmony, fitting in, maybe even self-criticism for the group's sake, might be valued more.
So if you try to apply, say, a therapy focused on boosting individual self-esteem in a collectivist culture,
it might not work well or could even be counterproductive. You have to adjust. This perspective is vital for global psychology. It stops us from just assuming Western ideas about the mind are universal.
Okay, that's 6 major lenses: behavioral, psychoanalytic, Humanistic, cognitive, biological, sociocultural, each giving a different piece of the puzzle.
Right, and they really come alive when you see them applied to real situations, real people.
Exactly, because psychology is best understood through its stories, right? So let's make this concrete. Let's look at 3 powerful case studies that really define the field in different ways.
Sounds good. We can kick off with maybe the most famous case study for the biological perspective. Phineas Gage.
Ah, yes, the railroad worker.
That's him. Gage was working in Vermont, 1848, highly respected foreman, known for being reliable, even-tempered.
Until the accident.
Until the accident. An explosion sent a tamping iron, basically a big iron rod shooting right through his skull.
Through his skull?
Yep. Entered under his cheekbone, went through the front part of his brain, and exited out the top of his head. Miraculously, he survived. He was conscious, talking even, moments later.
Unbelievable. But the key thing was the damage, right? To a specific brain area.
Exactly. The rod destroyed a large part of his frontal lobe, specifically the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, right behind the forehead.
And while his memory and basic skills were okay.
His personality changed drastically. The reliable, well-liked foreman became, according to reports, impulsive, erratic, unreliable, profane, just completely different. No longer Gage, as his friend said.
And this was groundbreaking because
It provided some of the first really compelling evidence that specific brain regions control complex aspects of personality, decision-making, and social behavior. Before Gage, many thought the brain worked more as a whole.
But this showed localization of function, that the frontal lobes are crucial for things like judgment and planning.
Precisely. It dramatically highlighted the biological perspective's core idea. Physical changes in the brain cause psychological changes in the person. A tragic but incredibly informative case.
Okay, moving from biology to behavior. The little Albert experiment. This one sounds unsettling.
It is unsettling, especially by modern standards. This was John B. Watson and Rosalie Rayner in 1920. They wanted to show that complex human emotions, specifically fear, weren't innate or unconscious, but learned through simple association.
Applying Pavlov's classical conditioning to a baby.
Essentially, yes. They took a 9-month-old infant known as Little Albert. Initially, Albert showed no fear of various objects, including a white laboratory rat. That was the neutral stimulus.
Okay, then came the conditioning.
Right. They started presenting the white rat to Albert, and just as he reached for it, they'd strike a steel bar with a hammer right behind his head. Made a loud, scary noise.
Which naturally scared him.
Exactly. That loud bang was the unconditioned stimulus that caused an unconditioned fear response. After only a few times pairing the rat with the noise...
He became scared of the rat itself.
Yes. The rat, which was neutral, became a conditioned stimulus eliciting a conditioned fear response. He'd cry and try to crawl away just seeing the rat, even with no loud noise.
Wow. And did the fear spread?
It did. That was another key finding stimulus generalization. Albert started showing fear towards other similar objects. A rabbit, a dog, a fur coat, even a Santa Claus mask with white cotton balls.
The implication is huge that phobias could basically be created through learning.
That was Watson's point. But the ethical problems are glaring.
Absolutely. They intentionally scared a baby, didn't get proper consent, and worst of all,
they never deconditioned him. Albert was removed from the study before they could reverse the fear response they'd created. It's a stark example of why we now have strict ethical guidelines from bodies like the APA protecting participants is paramount.
Okay, our third case study highlights the power of the situation. This bridges behaviorism and the sociocultural view. The Stanford prison experiment.
Zimbardo, 1971. This is probably one of the most famous and controversial studies in psychology.
What was the setup?
Zimbardo and his team wanted to see how social roles influence behavior. They recruited psychologically healthy male college students and randomly assigned them to be either prisoners or guards in a mock prison they set up in the basement of Stanford's psychology building.
And the key finding was how quickly people fell into those roles.
Disturbingly quickly. The environment and the assigned roles seemed to override the participants' individual personalities almost immediately.
What happened with the guards?
The guards rapidly became authoritarian, even abusive. They started imposing arbitrary rules, using push-ups for punishment, harassing the prisoners, depriving them of sleep. Some seemed to really relish the power.
And the prisoners?
They became passive, submissive, helpless. They showed signs of extreme stress, anxiety, depression. Some had emotional breakdowns.
And the whole thing had to be stopped early.
Yeah, Zimbardo shut it down after just 6 days instead of the planned 2 weeks because things got so out of hand. The ethical concerns were massive, both for the participants and Zimbardo's own dual role as researcher and prison superintendent.
So the big takeaway is the power of the situation. That context can make good people do bad things.
That's the dominant interpretation. It highlights how profoundly situational factors, the environment, the roles we're given, can shape our behavior, sometimes more than our individual dispositions. It links back strongly to behavioral ideas about environmental control and sociocultural ideas about roles and norms.
But this study also has its critics, methodologically.
Oh, big time. Especially recently. Critics argue the guards might have been responding to demand characteristics, basically, figuring out what Zimbardo wanted and acting accordingly. Some evidence suggests guards were explicitly coached on how to behave.
So maybe not as spontaneous as originally portrayed.
Potentially not. The debate continues, but regardless, it remains a really powerful cautionary tale in social psychology about the influence of roles and power dynamics, and again, about research ethics.
These cases really hammer home why psychology needs to be rigorous. It's dealing with real people, complex behaviors. It has to be a science.
Absolutely. It can't just be based on anecdotes or intuition. That rigor comes from the scientific method.
Right, the systematic process for gaining reliable knowledge.
Exactly. It's a cycle. It usually starts with hypothesis formation. You make an educated guess, a specific, testable prediction.
Like more sleep improves memory recall.
Perfect example. Then comes experimentation. You design a controlled study to test that hypothesis. You manipulate one thing, the independent variable.
Like the amount of sleep people get.
Right. And you measure the effect on another thing, the dependent variable.
Memory recall scores.
Exactly. And control is key. You need control groups, random assignment if possible, to make sure the only difference between groups is the thing you're manipulating.
But measuring psychological stuff must be tricky. How do you objectively measure something like happiness or aggression?
It's a huge challenge. Researchers have to operationalize these abstract concepts. That means defining them in specific, measurable terms.
So happiness might be measured by scores on a validated questionnaire or frequency of smiling or something like that.
Precisely. Or aggression might be measured by how many times someone interrupts another person in a controlled interaction. It's often imperfect. Finding good operational definitions is hard work.
I always have to be careful about correlation versus causation, right? We hear about correlations all the time.
The absolute classic mistake. Correlation just means two things tend to vary together, like maybe ice cream sales and crime rates go up at the same time.
But ice cream doesn't cause crime.
Right. The obvious third variable is heat, summer weather. Correlation does not imply causation. To show causation, you really need a well-controlled experiment where you manipulate one variable and see a direct effect on the other. And sometimes that's just not possible or ethical in psychology.
So how does the field ensure quality? How do we know findings are reliable, especially with things like researcher bias or the placebo effect?
Quality control is vital. One key is replication. Can other independent researchers run the same study and get similar results?
Psychology had some issues with that recently, the replication crisis.
It did. A lot of well-known older studies failed to replicate when retested with stricter methods. It forced the field to really tighten up its statistical practices, demand larger sample sizes, and increase transparency, like pre-registering hypotheses.
And then there's peer review.
Crucial. Before a study gets published, other experts in the field review it anonymously. They scrutinize the methodology, the results, the conclusions. It's a filter to catch flaws and maintain standards.
What about bias?
Researchers use techniques like double-blind studies, where neither the participant nor the researcher interacting with them knows who is in the experimental group versus the control group. This minimizes placebo effects and experimenter expectations.
And finally, ethics, after little Albert and Stanford.
Ethics are non-negotiable. Guidelines from organizations like the American Psychological Association, APA, are strict. You need that. Informed consent participants have to know what they're getting into, the risks and benefits, and agree freely.
Confidentiality.
Absolute confidentiality of their data, and the right to withdraw at any time, for any reason, without penalty. These aren't just suggestions, they're fundamental to ethical science.
Okay, so we've covered the history, the lenses, the case studies, the science. Why should someone listening right now really care about all this foundational stuff? How does it connect back?
Because psychology isn't just academic, it's arguably the most practical science for understanding yourself and navigating the world. These foundations directly inform how you can live better.
Give me an example. Daily life stuff.
Okay, think about your interpersonal relationships. Concepts from humanistic psychology, like empathy and active listening, really hearing someone, reflecting back what they said. That's Carl Rogers 101. Those techniques build understanding and reduce conflict. That's applied psychology right there.
Makes sense. What about professionally?
Oh, it's everywhere. Think about technology. User experience, UX design, that's almost entirely applied cognitive psychology. How do people process information on a screen? How do they learn an interface? What makes it intuitive versus frustrating?
Okay.
Education. Behavioral principles inform classroom management using positive reinforcement effectively. Cognitive principles guide how we teach breaking down complex topics using spaced repetition for memory.
Business. Leadership.
Definitely. Social psychology tells us about team dynamics, group decision-making, how to avoid groupthink. The biological perspective helps understand stress and burnout, leading to healthier workplaces. Knowing how the mind works is a massive advantage in almost any field.
It really is about understanding the operating system inside our heads.
That's a great way to put it. It's the user manual we weren't born with.
So quite a journey today. From Descartes wrestling with mind and body, Locke's blank slate,
To Vince building the first lab, James asking about function.
through the 6 big lenses: behavioral, psychoanalytic, humanistic, cognitive, biological, sociocultural, each with its own focus.
Often conflicting, but all adding pieces to the puzzle.
And those powerful case studies, Gage showing the brain's role, little Albert showing learned fear, Stanford showing the situation's power.
They really illustrate the core ideas and the ethical complexities.
It really drives home that understanding ourselves needs this multi-layered approach. We need to consider biology, unconscious stuff, learning, thinking, and the social world.
Absolutely. And maybe we can tie some of that together as we wrap up thinking about personality.
Okay.
We touched on personality models. One of the most robust is the Big Five model: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism.
Right, those core traits.
Research shows these 5 dimensions pop up pretty consistently across different cultures. It suggests there might be a kind of universal psychological architecture for personality. The basic structure seems similar everywhere.
But people express personality differently in different cultures, surely.
Totally. And that's where the lenses interact. The structure might be universal, maybe rooted in biology and cognition, but the expression, the function of those traits, that's heavily shaped by the sociocultural environment.
How so?
Well, being high in extroversion might lead someone to be the life of the party in one culture. In another, maybe it manifests as being a very outgoing community leader or a persuasive speaker in a different context. Same underlying trait, different behavioral expression based on cultural norms and values.
So the map is universal, but the landscape shapes how you navigate it.
Beautifully put. The biological and cognitive foundation is there, but the behavioral and cultural manifestation varies hugely.
That's a fascinating synthesis.
And maybe one last thought to leave you with, connecting to modern measurement and change. We mentioned the Flynn effect earlier.
The observation that IQ scores have been rising for generations.
Exactly. It suggests that, on average, human minds are getting better at the kinds of abstract reasoning IQ tests measure. Maybe our increasingly complex environments are literally selecting for or developing these cognitive skills.
So our environment is actively shaping our minds, generation by generation.
It seems plausible. Think about the sheer volume and complexity of information we process daily now. Constant connectivity, abstract data, multitasking.
It's a different world than 100 years ago.
Completely. So here's the provocative question. If our environment is pushing our cognitive abilities in this direction towards faster processing, handling more complexity, what fundamental psychological mechanisms might we be losing or trading off?
Like maybe deep focus, sustained attention, or certain kinds of memory.
Perhaps. What's the evolutionary cost of adapting to this hyper-complex, fast-paced technological world? What new challenges will these evolving cognitive abilities face next?
That is definitely something to think about. What are we potentially sacrificing as our minds adapt? A perfect question to mull over. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive today.
My pleasure.
We really encourage you to keep exploring these foundational ideas in cytology. Until next time.